Hello and welcome to the MeG podcast, back after a couple of months break for various reasons, which we won't bore you with, and back in a whole new year, 2024. So bye-bye 2023, here's 2024. Let's see what it brings us. Hopefully everybody will have lots and lots of great games over the year. MeG games and, of course, other games. Enjoy your wargaming in its widest possible way. But obviously, here on the MeG podcast, we are talking about MeG. And as usual, I am here with Richard Jeffrey Cook and Matt Haywood. Hello, guys.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So hopefully you had an excellent holidays, and we were all at a competition last weekend. That's the weekend before we're recording this. Don't know what it will be for you as listeners. So we started playing already, and as actually we were just discussing between ourselves, this coming weekend, Richard is off to, is it Brussels, Richard?
Off to Brussels, yes, to the IWC competition.
Great stuff. I mean, on that, it's finally getting out of my shell, and hoping later in this year to go to a competition in France as well. I've booked in, so committing to go and meeting our friends on the continent, and no doubt getting beaten by them. But that's all part of the fun. Okay, so we're going to kick off 2024 with one of our historical based podcasts, but slightly different to previous ones. We're going to look at the major battles of a well-known general, along with some sample army lists from the period, from the army they commanded and a couple of their opponents. Hopefully this will be a bit different, a bit interesting, and look at some of the history around it as well. We're going to start with Belisarius. The armies are therefore Early Byzantine, African Vandal, and Sasanid Persian. I'm afraid for the fans of the Ostrogoths, I'm afraid for this podcast they don't appear to have made the cut. So, but then again, realistically, most of the important battles, field battles they fought were actually a bit later than when Belisarius was commanding in Italy, fighting against Narcissus, if I remember rightly. Richard, that's correct, isn't it?
Oh, I think you're right, but that's not really my area of particular expertise.
Yeah, so. I just had this moment of crisis thinking, have I put my foot in? Yes, it was Narcissus, wasn't it? So and hopefully along the way we'll have a bit of discussion around the actual battles, maybe just looking at some interesting points of them. And certainly for one of them, I'd be interested in Matt and Richard's views on how you might actually undertake a refight of the battle, because it's potentially a bit different. It's certainly not two armies lining up against each other. So anyway, without further ado, we'll get into this. I'm going to start us by doing a bit of scene setting of the few decades before Belisarius appears on the scene as a military commander. And this essentially sort of follows on from the history Richard did in an early podcast of ours, Attila and the early years, where we looked at the rise of Attila, the Hun, and his battles against the Romans. So you may wish to go back and listen to that after this. I'll try and remember to put a link to that episode in the notes. Anyway, the situation for the Roman Empire, this is sort of a period where we transition the name Roman to Byzantine in the East. But of course, Byzantine was never used historically. That is I believe, a 16th century affection. A German author started calling the East Roman Empire Byzantine, which of course is the name of this Constantinople before it was Constantinople. So that's going back into classical times, really. Anyway, at this point, the empire in the West is in terminal decline. Africa's been lost to the Vandals, which is financially crippling the Western Empire, and Richard definitely touched on that in Attila the early years. And There were some attempts to recapture it. These relied very heavily on Eastern Empire help, and they failed miserably, basically. And the Vandals were well and truly ensconced in North Africa. So the empire is really just sort of fading away over the 6th century, and by the time we get to the the 5th century, by the time we get to the early 5th century, Gaul is under Frankish rule, Spain is under the Visigoths, Italy is under the Ostrogoths, and Africa remains under the Vandals. However, by comparison, the empire in the east managed to make it through the 5th century more or less intact. One of the factors that undoubtedly helped this was near total lack of conflict with the Sasanid Persians to the east. The Persians basically had too many problems with nomads on their eastern borders, such as the Hepslites, to worry about Rome. And with Rome focusing on, say, the Huns, well, they were quite happy not to fight each other. There were a few flare-ups, but nothing major. In the 440s, the Eastern Empire, as I just mentioned, had to face the Huns. They weathered that and the after effects of the collapse of Attila's empire. And that resulted in 2 separate groups of Goths within Roman territory. They ended up merging under the leadership of Theodoric the Great, and then were eventually persuaded by the Emperor Zeno to invade Italy, purportedly on behalf of the empire. It's a good way to get rid of them. They were successful, and that removed their threat from Roman territory. There were also a series of revolts of Isaurians under Zeno, who was an Isaurian himself. But by the time Anastasius came to the throne in 491, they were reasonably settled, although they did rattle on for a bit. But they were not an existential threat. Anastasius's reign, not Anastasia, that's a Russian princess. Anastasius's reign was not trouble-free, but does seem to something of a re-establishment of stability. The economy was in good shape, and there was a healthy surplus on taxes. And in fact, he managed to abolish some taxes, which is always popular and quite unusual. So the Roman Empire was generally adding taxes as it went along. And one effect of this, it proved possible to increase the pay of the army to a great extent, and conscription became a lot rarer. They actually managed to fill the army with volunteers. Anastasius did have one short war with Persia, which was essentially a draw. And just as part of the scene setting, it's worth noting that by this point, the eastern frontier between the Romans and the Persians had really become very hardened into a series of heavily fortified cities, which made major gains by either side incredibly difficult. Possibly the ultimate proof of this was the Great War of Khusrau II in the early 7th century, which, despite the problems the Byzantines had at the time, with the Persians in the ascendancy, it took them the best part of a decade to penetrate their way through Mesopotamia into the softer inner parts of the Byzantine Empire, and it pretty much worked the same way. And also, one important thing that happened with Anastasius's reign was the expansion and fortification of the town of Dara, which was a close point to the Persian city of Nisibis. This was actually in contravention of a treaty with the Persians, who complained bitterly. Anastasius paid them some money to shut up, and they were in no position to force the issue. But it remained a bone of contention for the future, and quite a lot of action took place around that. So we've had a long period of peace in the East, but that was actually broken under Anastasius' successor, Justin, when a series of wars with the Persians started. And these were going to last for a great deal of the 6th century, up to the point when Maurice came to the throne and helped restore Khusrau II to his throne after he'd been usurped. That only really caused peace in about the last decade of the century. So we're sort of entering a point of about 70 years of very considerable warfare on the Eastern Front. However, a lot of the action took place in Lazica, which is part of modern Georgia, at the eastern end of the Black Sea, and Armenia, due to the previously mentioned cities in Mesopotamia, although there was some serious action there. One result of this was that Justin's successor, Justinian, famous Justinian, actually created a whole new field army in the east, that of the Magister Militum per Armeniam, to reinforce the Eastern Front. And this was mainly created by drawing troops from other armies, and so actually didn't increase the overall military of the empire by much. And so it's into this sort of environment that Belisarius starts to appear in history, concentrated a bit there on the east, because that's where he pops up. Right, we shall bring Belisarius into the story now. As far as we can work out, he seems to have been born around about the year 500 CE in what is now modern Bulgaria, and would have been Thrace at the time. So this means he would be a Latin speaker, probably, rather than a Greek speaker. The empire, is now what was the Eastern Roman Empire, what we call the Byzantine Empire, is mainly Greek speaking. Well, say that, I think when you get into Syria and other areas, there are plenty of other languages as well, very, very number of Semitic languages, but for a lot of I suppose, as is always the case, you get the upper class view, so we get this as Greek speaking, but he was almost certainly Latin speaking. So he comes from about the same area that the emperors Justin and Justinian came from. And it does appear that Belisarius had been a bodyguard, possibly, or Belisarius, of Justinian at some point. Don't think we know much about him till he appears in Procopius's history for the year 527 CE, when he has a military command fighting against the Persians in Lazica. And in fact, as I reach the point in my notes, I have put down that Procopius says he receives the command because he had been one of Justinian's guardsmen. Nepotism is great. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And basically, the Roman Empire had always worked on that basis. He's at this point, he's found operating alongside another of Justinian's ex-guardsmen, a guy called Sitas. This guy would soon be appointed as Magister Militum per Armeniam for Armenia, to command Justinian's new army. And then in 530, he was actually promoted to be Magister Militum Praesentalis, commander of the army theoretically in the emperor's presence, which is the most senior command position in the army after the emperor. In theory, the emperor commands everybody. This suggests that Sitas might have been the senior of the two. There's not much detail of this fighting, but it's clear that it didn't go very well. And this joint command was defeated in 2 battles by the Persians. Not a lot of details, but it doesn't actually appear to have affected either person's career very much. Obviously, Sitas did well. And in 530, or just before, Belisarius was appointed to the position of Magister Militum per Orientum, which commands the main field army around Mesopotamia. At this point, Justinian orders him to take the offensive against Persia. However, before he can actually get into gear and launch an invasion of Persian territory, they receive news that there's a major Persian offensive aimed at the city of Dara, which we mentioned previously. So Belisarius moves to defend the city. So it's a major point, it has to be defended. When he gets there, despite knowing that the Persians are a substantial army, he decides he's not going to just sit in the city and see out a siege. He's going to stand outside and fight the Persians instead. So again, obviously his experiences of being defeated by the Persians haven't put him off. The Persian army is said to have numbered 40,000 infantry and cavalry, while Belisarius appears to have had about 25,000 soldiers himself. This included 300 heralds and 1,200 troops are described as Huns. So, the Persians have a significant numerical advantage. Just as a quick aside, I point out at this point, this army and none of the other Persian armies mentioned around this time have any elephants, and which we normally associate with the Sasanid Persians, and it does appear that it wasn't actually very common for the Persians to field elephants in field battles against the Byzantines, but they used them quite frequently in sieges. So make of that what you will. So anyway, outnumbered as he was, Belisarius therefore decided to have some trenches dug in front of his army to help mitigate the number of the fact that he's outnumbered. So, which in some ways always feels a bit odd to me, because he's got an army with a significant number of cavalry, but there we go. Yeah, he seems to have known what he was doing. The Byzantine army is deploys behind these trenches, and there's a hill on their left which will become important. The Byzantine army appears to be deployed with infantry in the centre, 2 wings of cavalry, and there's a slight twist on this. There's 2 small bodies of Huns around about each end of the infantry line. It's worth noting that generally taken that the trench isn't just a single line in front of the army. There's the bit that the infantry are standing behind. Now, I've seen 2 interpretations of this. The more common one is that it's stepped back, so the infantry are basically further away from the Persians than the cavalry are. But I've also seen an interpretation where it's stepped forward, so they're projecting in front of the cavalry. The description in Procopius isn't actually that helpful either way. To make it's one of those I'd say, please go and read Procopius and make your own mind up. But a key factor is that these 2 small bodies of Huns are placed so that they can intervene, especially into the flanks of the Persian cavalry if they push back the Romans. So that might aid you when thinking about it. I can't make my mind up, by the way. The Persians appear to have deployed with cavalry on the wings and presumably the infantry in the centre. In terms of relative numbers of cavalry and infantry for both armies, the sources aren't very helpful. Given the usual proportion of Byzantine armies at this point, Belisarius may have had about 10,000 cavalry and 15,000 infantry. That's a bit of a guess, but round about a third, maybe a bit more cavalry in the armies does seem reasonably typical. Persians, absolutely no idea at all. Fighting took place over 2 days, but it was mostly on the second. On the first day, there's a bit of skirmishing on the Roman left, which was then followed up by a number of single combats described by Procopius. And in Procopius, the Romans win all those single combats to much morale boosting. Maybe take that with a pinch of salt, who knows? But that was about all that took place. Overnight, the Persians get 10,000 more men as reinforcements arriving from Nisibis. So basically, at this point, Belisarius is outnumbered nearly probably about 2 to 1. The armies line up the same as they had the day before, with one small difference. The commander of the Herald Cavalry suggested to Belisarius that basically they should hide behind this hill that's on the left of the Roman line, so as to be able to intervene and charge the Persian in the flank or the rear. And Belisarius goes, that's a good idea, do it. So this 300 is snuck out of the line, put behind the hill to await events. The Persians, now massively outnumbering the Byzantines, then attack. They attack first on the right, heavy push with cavalry. The initial exchanges are bow fire, and Procopius describes the bow fire as the Persians are a lot more Persians and they're shooting more rapidly. However, there's a wind blowing at them, so this evens it out, and basically nobody gets a real advantage in this missile exchange. So after a period of missile exchanges, the Persian cavalry then charge the Roman cavalry, despite the ditch that's in the way, and start pushing them back. So we could assume that they have numerical superiority, or that they had in fact got the better of the missile exchange. At this point, the heralds climb the hill and charge into their flank to, as you would expect, fairly devastating effect. And the closest body of Huns also joins in, attacking the flank of the Persians. At this, the Persians then withdraw. Not necessarily a rout, but they've suffered significant casualties, and they're not going to take any more part in the battle. The Persian attack then switches to their left wing, the Byzantine right, and the Persian commander reinforces the left wing with his reserve cavalry. And basically, they attack in the same way that the Persian right wing did. If anything, they come to hand-to-hand combat quicker, and again are pushing back the Roman right wing. And in a rather similar way to the other wing, again, the Hunnic body charges into the flank of Persians, and Belisarius brings his Bucalari up to help the right wing Roman cavalry, and charges into the Persians as well. The Persian commander on this flank is killed by the Hunnic commander, apparently. Everything's always ascribed to the commanders in Procopius, and they break. At this point, the Persian army runs away, and Belisarius has scored a very significant victory against a substantial Persian army. So, big tick to him. So, I've got one thing that's always puzzled me about this battle is the effect of the ditches. You would generally expect, if the ditch to be a significant barrier to cavalry.
I'm not sure I necessarily agree. If you're trying to defend a ditch or other linear obstacle with cavalry, it's actually quite hard to do. You're better off being further back from the obstacle, letting your opponent cross, and then attacking them while they're disorganized.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, I can live with that.
So perhaps it's. I've heard a suggestion. I don't know the truth of it. Is that in fact the ditches were there to try and direct the Persians to where the Romans wanted to fight them. So they may have been more strategic, placed strategically to encourage the Persians where to attack, rather than necessarily being an obstacle to defend.
Okay,
that's only my suggestion.
No. I mean, again, it's despite Procopius writing quite a lot about the battles, he doesn't actually go into any sort of particular detail with that. So I suppose that makes perfect sense. And the bit you're saying, if the Roman cavalry was standing a bit behind and maybe had been driven back a bit by the archery of the Persians could cross. The Romans weren't quite ready to counterattack. Yeah, and it comes to that. Matt, have you got any thoughts on that one, or I mean, any Eastern European experiences that could inform us, since that's your area?
Well, the question that comes to mind is, if ditches were that effective, why do we not see them more?
Perhaps it's a bit like what we sometimes say about things like barricades and stakes in MeG, because you don't get a fight. And if you're actually in a point where you want to force a decision.
Yeah, which kind of lends into Richard's theory that it either wasn't entirely across the front, or it was blocking off certain areas where they really didn't want the Persians to be, for whatever reason, flat piece of ground, or No, I think Richard makes the most obvious sense. So
So again, raises the question. Okay, so we've got partial ditches, not very deep ditches. How would we depict them and mechanism for them if we were going to refight the battle?
Yeah, I think it's the same argument you could use for many streams and smaller gullies in ancient battles, that the level at which they affect the battle tends to be too detailed for our games to reflect. So the simple answer is use Occam's razor and leave them out.
Well, as I say, from my rereading Procopius, he's not talking about any Persians falling in the ditch as when they attack them. So I could go with that. Any clever mechanisms spring to mind, Matt?
I mean, yeah, no. Simple answer. I mean, you could say if people haven't moved, maybe there's count it like a pervase almost. That it's a up factor in the first round, but I don't even think that works, because if the Persians were successful initially, as it sounds like they were, then yeah, their effect was minimal.
Yeah, and the fact it happened on both flanks suggests it's pretty consistent. So yeah, because it's a strange one, really. But equally, Belisarius obviously saw it as a force multiplier.
Well, he clearly had some reason. You don't just dig ditches for the sake of it.
not when the enemy's bearing down on you, that's for sure. Yeah. So anyway, the upshot of it is his decision not to just heavily garrison Dara and to actually fight the battle paid off. So the following year, the Persians invaded again, but with a somewhat different army. This time, the Persian king ordered an army. It was about 15,000 men, apparently, and these were all cavalry, and there were also 5,000 allied Arabs with them. In fact, the whole thing may have been the idea of the Arab commander. When I say the 15,000, that may or may not include the Arabs. Again, Procopius has managed not to be specific on this. So you could interpret it either way. It's 15,000 Persians and 5,000 Arabs, or 15,000 in total. As it appears to have been basically a heavy-duty raid, I think most people tend to go with it's 15,000 in total. As we will see, they definitely didn't come and fight a big pitch battle. Anyway, when he hears about this, Belisarius collects an army of about 20,000 together, and also recruits Arabs himself. There are Arabs allied to the Persians, there are Arabs allied to the Byzantines. And by a staggering coincidence, the number of Arabs given for Belisarius's army is also 5,000. Call me cynical, I'm a bit suspicious that both armies have 5,000. But numbers are always a bit unreliable, and maybe it's just a case of there's quite a lot of them and they were about equal. Richard's looking as though he's got a comment coming on this.
I don't believe any statistics given to you by a government.
Yeah, and again, to be honest, interpretations of the numbers on the Byzantine side, I say there's an army of 20,000. Some people think that includes the Arabs, some people don't. So we could have 20,000 against 15,000, 25,000 against 15,000, 20,000 against 20,000, 25,000 against 20,000. A bit of take your pick. Obviously, the previous year there would be casualties for the Byzantines and the Persians on both. So yeah, so you can spend days talking around that. I tend to drift to the lower end of numbers these days, but I think the important thing is Belisarius had a material advantage in numbers. So certainly on the Persian side, we can assume the Arabs were all mounted. This is a mounted raid, and I would think it's highly likely on the Byzantine side as well that the Arabs are mainly, if not all, cavalry. If we take Belisarius as having 20,000 Romans, again, proportions of cavalry and infantry are not actually properly explained, but you'd probably be looking at 8,000 cavalry and 12,000 infantry. One thing we do know about the infantry is they included 2,000 that are sometimes described as Isaurians by Procopius, and sometimes as, I've completely forgotten what the other description was, but which is really helpful for all our listeners, isn't it? Something like Lycaonian or something. Isaurians had a good reputation as fighters, the others didn't. And as we'll see, they didn't actually fight very well, so I don't know whether there's some dissing of them going on in the naming. One thing they were, though, is very enthusiastic for battle. So overconfident and not very good would probably, however you want to classify those in an army you were doing. So the Persians invade. They invaded by a slightly unusual route, somewhat to the south of where they normally did. But the Byzantines picked up on this fairly quickly, and Belisarius moved to intercept them. When they realised that they'd been rumbled, the Persians started to retreat. As I said, they weren't here for pitched battle. It was a big raid, caused as much trouble as possible, possibly to influence ongoing peace talks. Throughout these wars between the Persians and Byzantines, there are envoys moving backwards and forwards and discussing peace. Eventually, the Persians were brought to bay at a place called Kalinicum, which is right by the Euphrates. They're retreating out of Roman territory, and they line up. They finally decide they have to line up for battle. Belisarius has somehow managed to catch up with them, despite the fact he's undoubtedly got a lot of infantry. And so they turn to fight. And they have the Euphrates on their right. The Byzantines will have them on their left. It's a classic MeG, secure flank, deep water. Bang on, straight out the rules. So, up to this point, Belisarius has been completely happy just to shepherd the Persians out of Roman territory. He's actually described as sort of following a day's march behind at some point and basically camping where the Persians had camped the night before. But now he's caught up. He's faced with a decision. According to Procopius, Belisarius doesn't want to fight. He just wants to carry on with his successful push them out. We'll see what happens. Let the peace talks continue after our great victory of the previous year. However, Procopius also says that the army wanted to fight, and this is where these Isaurians, pseudo-Isaurians, come in. Apparently, they were one of the major agitators to fight.
I think they are Lycaonians.
Oh, thank you, Richard.
Looking for who came from somewhere in the sort of centre of the sort of South Turkish plain. Right,
rather than Isauria. Thank you. Save my blushes for not writing it down in my notes. So you can always trust Richard to come up with these things. Okay, one of Belisarius's arguments for not fighting was apparently that the next day was going to be Easter Day, the day they would fight on, or the Easter Sunday, which was a fast day. So he didn't want his army fighting if they weren't going to be able to eat that day. One can believe that or not, but Easter Sunday is the date given for the battle. However, the army is insistent, and these Lycaonians are very insistent that they must fight. And so apparently Belisarius gives in, and the next day he draws up for battle. The battle lines are very simple. The Belisarius draws up with his infantry on the left, and then his Roman cavalry, and the Arab cavalry on the right. So the ground's sloping up to the right for the Byzantines, away from the Euphrates. Most reconstructions put these Lycaonian foot also on the right, between bodies of cavalry. Now, when I reread Procopius before this, I wasn't convinced that he actually says that, but the course of the battle does suggest they were at the very least on the right of the infantry line, for reasons that will become clear. The Persians basically line up opposite. They deploy their Arabs opposite the Arabs that the Byzantines are deployed, and all their Persian cavalry in front of the rest of the line. So basically, they're just lined up opposite each other. There's a classic two armies sitting opposite each other. Battle commences much the same way as it did at Dara, with an archery exchange. And again, Procopius contrasts the archery of both sides. He says that the Persians shot far more rapidly than the Byzantines, but that the Byzantine shooting was stronger because they drew their bows further back. So we've got two different styles of archery, apparently. But again, doesn't seem to have made too much difference on that. So draw your own conclusions. But the rapid shooting for the Persians is, of course, the basis for the army list classification of shower shooting, so we may come to later. So there's quite an extensive exchange of archery at this point, and then at some point the Persian commander moves a significant number of his cavalry to his left wing, and then they assault the Roman right wing, breaking them basically, or most of them. The Arabs on the Roman side leave the battlefield, no doubt pursued by the Arabs of the Persian side. The Lycaonian infantry perform pitifully. You know, wherever they are on the battlefield, they get very quickly destroyed, although their leaders seem to fight well.
The suggestion is it was actually the Arab cavalry fleeing that exposed their flank, and that may explain why the Lycaonians were no match for the Persian cavalry.
Yeah, but it has to be said, Procopius's description of them is pretty damning in that they didn't fight well, apart from their two leaders who inevitably got killed. So it would make, that would be an explanation as to why people put them further out to the right.
I mean, there is a suggestion that the Romans' Sasanid allies actually were treacherous and fled intentionally, although that seems to be a bit of an after the event story.
Yes, I think that tends to happen, especially to Arab allies. Allies quite often get blamed for things, and Arabs, I think, at the time were seen as quite flighty.
Yeah, their reputation starts with Crassus's defeat at Carrhae.
Of course, yes.
And the Arab references to Arabs don't seem to get any better in Roman sources after that time.
Got off on the wrong foot and didn't improve. Anyway,
Indeed.
So at this point, most, if not all, of the Roman right and most of the cavalry is routing, leaving the infantry stranded. Now the infantry then form up basically with their backs to the Euphrates in a roughly U-shaped formation, and then stand there. The Persians keep trying to charge them down and get nowhere. It seems that whilst I was saying earlier that the Roman infantry is not the battle-winning force, but they're obviously very competent at resisting, and the Persians can't break them down. Although, of course, at this point, the Persians have been shooting for a lot of the day, and a lot of them will have been fighting against the Roman cavalry. So, one could maybe suggest that they weren't in tip-top position to be charging down cavalry. But basically, the Roman infantry hold out until nightfall and then can evacuate the area. What Belisarius was doing at the time, there are two options. Procopius suggests that he joined the infantry and stayed with them during their resistance and no doubt encouraging them. The alternative, in another source, is that he left the field with the cavalry, and the infantry did it under their own local commanders. I mean, obviously they've got generals with them. They're not just sitting there all alone. So, it's one of those. Is Procopius making excuses for Belisarius? Personally, my view is it would be quite possible for him to be swept away with the cavalry, but Procopius obviously doesn't want his hero to be seen to be running away. So again, Richard, obviously, something about this. Any thoughts?
You pay your money, you take your choice. I suspect it's who was responsible for the history and whether they were a fan of Belisarius or an opponent of Belisarius. I think you've got two conflicting accounts.
Yeah.
Judging by the fact that there was a later inquiry,
yeah,
and Belisarius was actually found to be not guilty of causing the defeat, I suspect he hung around for long enough to at least provide a reasonable impression that he was trying to save as much of the army as he could, rather than fleeing in abject fear.
Yeah, no, I think I could go with that. I mean, there's always the, because obviously Procopius worked for Belisarius. There's always there'll always be the suggestion that he's just bigging up his paymaster. But yeah, as Richard just said, after this battle, Belisarius was removed from his command and recalled to Constantinople, where an inquiry into what had happened, and apparently including his defeats earlier as well, pre-Dara, were taken into account, but he was acquitted. So, yeah, again, we don't know any details of what went on there. So, but the ultimate thing is he was acquitted as for that. One thing that happened while he was in Constantinople at this point are the Nika riots. There was basically the populace got really quite upset at Justinian for a number of reasons, and as the Constantinople population was wont to do on occasion, started a massive riot. Belisarius was one of the people, along with his Bucellari that were with him, in suppressing this riot. So the riot happened over a number of days, centred on the Hippodrome, and there are figures of 30 to 40,000 civilian casualties as part of this, which is truly astonishing, considering that would be far in excess of the population of most cities in the Byzantine Empire at the time. When you leave aside Constantinople, Antioch, and Alexandria, most cities are vastly small. You're talking, if those numbers are in any way near true, it's like wiping out 3 or 4 cities. It must have been horrific.
Yeah, the suggestion was they were trapped in the Hippodrome, and the troops showed no mercy. Yeah, it's pretty horrific under any circumstances.
It's one of those, I can't think of any mitigating circumstances, really. Anyway, this obviously kept Belisarius in Justinian's good books, and shortly after he was reappointed to his old command, but given a remit to take an army to Vandal-held Africa to retake it for the empire. There'd just been an usurpation of the Vandal throne, and a noble called Gelimer had just deposed the sitting king, and because of this, there's a revolt in Sardinia as well. So Justinian sees an opportunity and takes it. I think there's a lot of discussion about whether Justinian actually did have a grand plan for the reconquest of as much of the old Roman Empire as possible, but he was certain, whether he did or not, he was certainly had an eye for a chance here. So he gave Belisarius an army and said, "Go and retake Africa for us." And so Belisarius got his army together and set sail. The army he was given was remarkably small, really. 5,000 Roman cavalry and 10,000 Roman infantry, 400 heralds, so they keep cropping up, 600 troops that Procopius described as Massagetae, it could be Huns, so they're the nomads, and almost certainly Belisarius' own Bucalari, which may have been numbered just over 1,000, would be added to that as well. The fleet was fairly large. I mean, there's 30,000 sailors and was escorted by 92 warships. And apparently on the warships, there were 2,000 rowers who were fully able to fight as well. So they could always have been drawn on for that. But regardless of those numbers, about 17,000, maybe 19,000 if you include the rowers, is a lot smaller than the expeditions that the Eastern Empire had launched in the 5th century to retake Africa from the Vandals, which had failed miserably. The last one had almost bankrupted the empire. So it's quite, it would appear to be quite a daunting task. And Procopius certainly says that quite a lot of Justinian's senior advisors were heavily against it, but he pushed through it anyway. One thing that was initially in Belisarius' favour is that the Sardinian revolt had drawn off 5,000 of the best Vandal troops under Gelimer's brother Sazon, I think. It's Tzazon, to go and suppress the revolt. So a good chunk of the best troops wouldn't be there at the beginning. So anyway, there's a few bits and pieces on the way which I will gloss over, and Belisarius lands in Africa and starts to march on Carthage. At this point, Gelimer is, for some reason, away in the south of the country and takes a bit of time to react to Belisarius' landing and advancing. But when he does, he comes up with a plan to attack Belisarius on the march with 3 bodies of troops converging from different directions, presumably hoping to catch him on the march and snuff out the invasion as soon as possible. Now, this I think it would have to be called a fairly ambitious plan. Coordinating 3 different bodies of troops in a period when the communication is basically as fast as a horse can gallop is certainly quite ambitious. So he seems to have taken a bold stroke at the moment. So Richard's shaking his head.
What could possibly go wrong?
We're about to find out. So a battle does occur. And this is quite an interesting one. So it could be a little difficult to describe. Hopefully I'll manage it, because it's sort of watch the moving parts, and it takes place over quite an expanded area. It takes place close to a place called Decimum, which gives its name to the battle, which is taken to be the 10th milestone in Roman miles from Carthage.
It's basically just south of Carthage.
Yes, I believe basically it's slap bang in the middle of modern Tunis. So we're never going to excavate the battlefield. So on the day Belisarius is marching towards Carthage, but he knows that there's going to be a Vandal reaction. So he has sent out 300 of his Bucalari, probably about 4 kilometers ahead of the main body of the army. He's also sent 600, the Huns, the Massagetae, are covering his left flank, again, some kilometers away to the west of the army. The rest of the army is more or less with Belisarius, and their right is covered the coast. They're marching along the coast road. Belisarius's column of march has Roman cavalry and then bucellari, and the infantry are bringing up the rear. Right, we're now going to go to different parts of action across the field. So the bucellari at the front are advancing towards Carthage. At the same time, a body of Vandals under a general called Amatas are coming from Carthage towards the rendezvous point that Gelimer is trying to do. However, it turns out they are not exactly proceeding in good formation. The description is they're scattered in bodies along the road. The bucellari, around about midday, meet these troops, or at least the front of the column, ill-prepared, but probably numerically superior force, and basically they charge them straight up. Take one look and go, charge. Apparently these 300 suffer 12 casualties, but they rout the front of this column, and then they just carry on down the road, bashing every group of Vandals they meet, and basically pursue to the walls of Carthage. So I don't know if in MeG terms this is a charge, the ultimate charge phase combat. But you know, it's obviously this Byzantine general Amatus has just really not been paying attention. You know, he's coming to rendezvous for a battle, but has just left his men strung out and yeah, whatever, move along in small bodies.
Well, yeah, and the front ones run away, and that sweeps all the ones behind.
And then the panic goes straight down the line, and they just disperse. We don't know how many men there were in this group, but they almost certainly outnumbered the 300 bucellari. Now the bucellari are good, but that's still some going. Round about the same time, a force of 2,000 Vandal cavalry come across the Huns, who are out on the left wing of Belisarius's march column. So again, we've got a significant number of Vandal cavalry, 600 Huns, and the 600 Huns absolutely trash them. Procopius says they just charge the Vandals, who just break and run away. I suspect there's going to be some missile exchange in there before that, maybe not a lot. The Vandals may be so shot up by one volley. Maybe it's a good old MeG shoot and charge. Who knows? But you know, basically outnumbered about 3 to 1. The Huns win. The general, who's called Gibamundus, is killed, and the Huns run off pursuing the Vandals. So that's another disaster for the Vandals. It's not going well. So at this point, Belisarius is marching up the road, and his advance guard and his flank guard have done the business on theirs. So at this point, Gelimer, with the main body of the Vandals, is getting close to ad decimum. Now, the next advancing body of Roman cavalry, who I believe are described as the Federati, although these aren't the Federati of old, they're basically regular troops. So they must have got somewhat ahead of the rest of the army, or been ordered to do so by Belisarius. And they come across Gelimer. They're met by Gelimer's presumably much larger force. A fight ensues over possession of a hill, but Gelimer's troops drive off the Roman cavalry, who then withdraw back towards the main body. Here they meet the rest of the bucellari, probably about 800, who have been sent forward by Belisarius, and both units then withdraw or flee, depending how you want to read it, back towards the main body and Belisarius. So maybe the Federati were defeated, and this time the Bucalauri get carried away. The same, similar to the initial Vandal force. However, when they get to the main body, Belisarius rallies them or stops them retreating, calms everything down, and pulls the body together and advances with them towards where Gelimer is. At this point, Gelimer has come across the site of the initial fighting, where Amatus was killed in that initial clash. Amatus, I forgot to mention, is Gelimer's brother. And Procopius' accounts is that at this point, Gelimer stops and decides to arrange a burial of his brother's body. Doesn't appear to have drawn up his troops in any great order. So they're sort of milling around a bit at this point. At which point, Belisarius and all the rest of his cavalry turn up, charge Gelimer's troops, who are somewhat dispersed. They break and run away. And so all three bodies of the Vandal troops have now been broken. It all seems to, an elaborate plan seems to have gone pear-shaped rather quickly, and perhaps rather surprisingly. After this, Belisarius is free to advance on Carthage the next day and walks in and takes possession. So a sort of running encounter battle. So I think, the obvious question I now want to ask Richard and Matthew is, how would you go about refighting this? It's a very dispersed battle with different bodies of troops running around.
I personally, I would do it as a series of actions, with the results of one action feeding into the next.
So you sort of do the attack on the troops coming by Carthage, run that, and if the Byzantines rout them, all well and good. And if the Vandals defeat the Byzantines, come up with some way that then impacts on.
So the sequence, so the sequence of engagements ends in the main battle. But
right.
What you take into account the losses or gains from the previous. Well, the losses mainly from the previous encounters.
Yeah. So if that initial Bucalauri and the Huns are beaten, we'll end up with a battle with all of Gelimer's troops and those two bodies together fighting.
The other way you could do it is sort of with a sort of like the old matchbox system of hidden movement, and allow the commanders to move the troops around without knowing where the opponent is, because it seems to me that the Vandals at least had no idea where the Byzantines were. And I suspect the Byzantines got a bit lucky personally, but there you go.
Oh, my view is they definitely got lucky. They did. So, Matt, any thoughts from yourself?
The other way you could do it is to fight it on 3 tables. The main fight on the 6x4, and then 4x4 tables on either side, but deploy them almost 90 degrees. So you've got like the Byzantine cavalry towards the main table, pointing outwards, and then do it that way. Because if the Vandals win, they're pushing into the main force from the sides. If the Byzantines successfully delay or win, that it stops the Vandal reinforcements. I do have one question. Who described it as a battle plan? Because it almost sounds like to me that the Vandal commanders basically said, we're going to meet here, get your troops moving. It's almost like a rendezvous point to meet up for a battle, not
I think that's a fair comment. I think that would certainly apply to the troops coming out of Carthage, who've been told to go to a place. The other two bodies, Gelimer with the majority of it, I believe the troops that were defeated by the Huns were detached from his army to approach the meeting point by a different route. So he does seem to be at least trying to get his troops arriving from different points. it does somewhat feel to me there is an attempt to catch the Byzantines on the march, or at the very worst, we will all rendezvous ahead of them. Yeah, but I think the troops coming from Carthage probably did have just meet us at Decimum, and the detached troops were probably told to go to Ad Decimum via this route, and I'll come up via the other route. So I'd wondered, I suppose, similar to Matt, whether you could do it on a reasonable sized table in Pacto in 6mm and have everybody on there, and somehow come up with, I don't know whether you would be dicing or pulling cards or whatever for the arrival of the different Vandal forces on table. To add that, you need some uncertainty.
Yeah, with a big enough table, you can certainly do Pacto and have some quite separate engagements that then come together. Yeah,
it was just my thing how you would deploy it on one board that was reasonably manageable. I don't know whether you could do it on a 6x4 is probably not big enough. Maybe an 8 by something. You might just about get it on. Mainly Pacto movements. That's it's the half base width rather than the full base width. So
yeah,
just trying to do it as panoramic, and I think you might lose a bit of spectacle on that though, because you'd have a lot of board and a low troop density.
Indeed, but well, maybe it's one I'll try at the Society of Ancients convention this year.
Yeah. I just think and how you decided how the Vandals would enter the arena, so to speak, I think could be quite key. I think you've got to give them a chance, haven't you?
Yeah, but you could also have a few dummy forces on the table just to throw in a bit of confusion.
Oh no, that could be an interesting way of doing it, couldn't it? Yeah, I mean, there's a number of hills around there. There's some salt flats, as well as the roads of it. So yeah, you could certainly. I think you could throw a few things in like that.
So you're approaching a force and you don't know if it's real or
whether it's just a few donkeys. Okay, we shall push on with the narrative now, because coming to this is going to be the fourth and last battle I'm going to go through, which is whilst it has some interesting points, is more of a straight up battle. So I'm flicking through some notes. So after this defeat, Gelimer writes to his brother in Sardinia and basically says, "Get your troops back here now. We desperately need them. It's all gone a bit pear-shaped so far." So his brother rushes his 5,000th troops back from Sardinia, and these were described as the 5,000 best troops, and rendezvous with Gelimer. So that's the only firm number we've got for the Vandal side. Gelimer has no doubt pulled together as many as his survivors from Ad Decimum as possible. Not sure how many casualties they had there. I would very much doubt that he pulled together more than 10,000 more soldiers. So you're probably looking at an army that might have been 15,000 men tops. He did manage to recruit some Moors, but they were not very enthusiastic and had been talking to the Byzantines and had allegedly given Byzantines some of their children as hostages. So don't know if Gelimer knew that, but they obviously weren't going to be very reliable. However, Gelimer had been in contact with the Huns in Belisarius's army to try and subordinate them, and they basically agreed that in an upcoming fight they wouldn't join in, or perhaps it would join in with whoever's winning when the outcome became more obvious. So anyway, the two armies approach each other. On the day of the battle, the Vandals appear to have a bit of a jump on Belisarius. Initially, at the start of the day, didn't deploy their army, and then about midday they suddenly deploy it, and this appears to have been timed to coincide with the Byzantines' usual habit of taking a midday meal. So again, they're obviously thinking about this if this is true. So they actually coming back to a point Richard made earlier about streams. The Vandals deploy behind what is a very minor stream. Procopius says it's so minor it's not even been named. So this could be one of these really. It's a very small, very shallow, and it doesn't appear to have actually made much impact on the battle. Definitely caught the Byzantines on the hop. That Belisarius reacted by basically sending all his cavalry up to deploy opposite the Vandals, with his infantry following on behind. Procopius describes it as at the walk. So they were just ambling along, coming up to when they were needed. The Vandals deployed with the 5,000 best troops of Sasanid in the centre of the line, with the other troops deployed, Vandal troops deployed on either wing, and the Moors with the army are deployed behind the main body of the Vandals. The Byzantines are deployed very similarly. The Bucalaroi are in the centre of the line, rest of the cavalry right and left flank, and the Huns, I think, were out on the left flank, hanging around, looking a bit shifty, no doubt. The battle's a very, very old one. There isn't like a big mass charge at this point or anything. It's not even all the Byzantines riding up to shooting distance, loosing arrows and trying to get the Vandals' attempt. What happens is the commander in the centre of the Byzantine line is ordered to take some Bucalaroi and cavalry forward to goad the centre of the Vandal line. So they splash into the stream, splash across, sort of skirmish a bit with them, bit of desultory fighting, and possibly charge the Vandal centre, and they are repulsed, or maybe it's a feigned retreat. At this point, the cavalry retire apparently all the way back to the Byzantine camp, but Sasanid in the centre prevents his troops from pursuing. So if it is a feint flight, it doesn't work, and the Vandal line stays intact. The Byzantines then repeat this with another group of Bucalaroi and regular cavalry, who basically rinse and repeat, and again withdraw back to the Byzantine camp. The fact they go back to the camp is possibly the basis of the suggestion that this is a feigned retreat, or they were broken. So the tactic of trying to provoke the Vandals hasn't worked. So the commander, who's called John, basically launches an all-out charge with the Bucalaroi and some regular cavalry in the centre at the best troops in the Vandal army, Sasanid's Sardinian veterans, and a big fight ensues in the centre. It seems to have been decided by the fact that Sasanid is killed, at which point the rest of the Byzantine army, the right and the left wing, also advance across the stream to charge the Vandals. The Vandals now put up very little fight and run away. The no doubt shifty-looking Huns then join in on the side of the Byzantines and pursue the Vandals, probably straight to the camp. And that is that strange battle, in my view. It basically settles the war in Africa. The Vandal kingdom has collapsed. It is now in the hands of the Byzantines. One thing to note in that is that despite the fact that Gelimer as the king is there, he is not mentioned as fighting at all. He's mentioned as giving a rousing speech at the beginning, and then that's it. He eventually runs away to some mountains in the south, and later gives himself up and is sent back to Constantinople, and I believe pensioned off to a villa somewhere in what is now modern Turkey, in Anatolia. So I would suggest in this one, the Vandals have just performed peculiarly badly. even their best troops don't seem to have done that well. As soon as the general's killed, they run away, more or less.
Yeah, you wonder how committed they were to fighting for Gelimer, don't you?
Yes.
Bear in mind the way he had. I mean, I believe he deposed his cousin. That's how he became.
I think it was his cousin. I think it was Huneric and
Hilderic.
Hilderic, yeah.
I think it is.
Yeah, and when the Byzantines invaded, he had him killed.
Yeah, because Hilderic had tried to convert the Vandals from their Arian Christianity. So perhaps he wasn't the sort of first choice of the Vandal nobility by any means. But yeah, the speed at which the Vandal kingdom collapses is almost as quick as the way the Roman province of Africa collapsed to the Vandals 110 years earlier.
That's true.
I mean, there may not have been, of course, a huge number of Vandals. No, they very much were the nobility of the kingdom, and didn't really have any. They weren't any support from the majority of the population. So, having already been defeated at Decimum, lost Carthage as a capital, the authority of Gelimer perhaps was already pretty minimal. And of course, if I'm right, 3 units of Vandal cavalry get formed in Persia, don't they?
I believe it's 4. Yeah, I mean after this,
after the battle.
Yeah, Belisarius shortly returns to Constantinople, taking the significant number of Vandal prisoners with him, and presumably Gelimer as well. And they're formed. It's 3 or 4 units who are called Vandali Justiniani, and promptly sent to the Eastern Front.
Yeah. So the Romans obviously thought they could fight quite well, because you wouldn't have enlisted them in your own army if they were useless.
Exactly. Yeah, it is. I suppose again, I think there's an inevitable list question here, isn't there? You know, under Gelimer, should the Vandals be downgraded in quality?
Well, you can always downgrade, and you can downgrade them, and you don't have to take the melee expert. So if you really want an interesting Vandal army, Matt, here's one for you. Form loose, poor cavalry, devastating short spear, devastating charger, but no melee expert. I bet they come in quite cheap.
Yeah, we could possibly tempt Graham Clacker with that one.
I was just thinking that was one for Graham, possibly.
to move on from poor cataphracts to poor Vandal cavalry. Yeah, actually, there's one thing I didn't mention about this. Apparently, in this battle, the Vandals were ordered to only use their swords, which I doubt would make. That's what you could. So perhaps you could claim they shouldn't even have short spear for this battle.
Possibly mediocre generals would be a good start if that's the first order you issue in the battle.
Sazizon seems to have been okay, but nobody else does.
No.
It's the speed is very peculiar. But no, Richard is absolutely right. The Vandals do seem to have been the ruling aristocracy. They were a different brand of Christianity to the mainly Catholic population, and I believe Belisarius did order his army to be as well behaved towards what they would see as ex-Roman population. So I think it, the Vandals would not have the local population on their side. They were very much relying on the ethnic Vandals.
You've got to have figured that the local population after 110 years have probably forgotten Byzantine tax practices.
Funny you should mention that, because there were revolts later on, and I believe rather inevitably taxation was a factor in that as well. So yeah. So anyway. sort of vague. Sorry, was there something
I was
else?
just going to say, for anyone who's interested, poor formed loose protected short spear devastating charge of cavalry come in at 62 points each.
Well, can you get them below 60 if you drop the short spear?
So you see now, suddenly I'm interested.
Just think of the number of figures you'd have to buy.
Oh, I'm sure I could borrow them from Ray.
Actually, if somebody's willing to field it, I think we should all, if we've got any suitable figures, loan them to the poor deluded soul.
Well, but by comparison, superior protected short spear, dev charger, melee expert cavalry come in at 177 points each. So you can get about three poor ones for the price of one good one.
Yeah. You know, if you were commanding an army of the good ones and was attacked by an army of the poor ones, you would guarantee that the poor ones, on their first dice roll, despite being down, would get an S for the shatter.
Oh, they would.
I don't think that helps them a great deal, does it?
No.
Be down 2 levels of quality, so all it'll do is turn it into a green,
and then they'd skull you every single one.
Okay, maybe.
It's okay, probably not. Statistically, a bit wild, but I could just see the first one coming up as an S. You're yellow. You will blank. They'll roll an S, and then you're on to green, and they'll get a couple of skulls, and you'll just start banging your head on the table, going, "What's going on?"
I was going to say it didn't happen to my elephants last weekend.
Okay, right. Just the last little bit, just to wrap up Belisarius' career, because basically there are no more of these big battles for Belisarius. He's sent to Sicily and Italy to reconquer that from the Goths. That just turns into a massive war of sieges that drags on and on and on and on and on. There's an epic siege of Rome from 537 to 538 with Belisarius inside the city with a relatively small force, besieged by Goths outside it, although they're not enough of them to go all the way around the city. But that just keeps going on and on until Belisarius gets reinforcements. He has another stint on the Eastern Front and a second stint in Italy, but as I said, there aren't any more major battles. The nearest we get is his last battle in 559 against some Bulgars. It is just an epilogue to his career. There's a significant Bulgar army invades Thrace. For some reason, there aren't any regular troops around to protect Constantinople. Justinian recalls Belisarius, who scrapes together 300 veterans and some local levies, numbers unknown. And he decides to advance on the Bulgar camp. The Bulgars, finding nobody in their way, have decided to try a rapid surprise attack on Constantinople with about 2,000 men. Belisarius blocks their way with his small number of regulars, basically ambushes missile troops, I think it's described as slingers, on the flanks, which throws the Bulgars into some disorder. And at the same time, he gets the local levies it must be a wooded area, because he gets them to go into the woods, make noise and shake the trees to scare the Bulgar horses, which apparently works. The Bulgars are panicked by the unexpected resistance, the noise, retreat, and go home. Plundering on the way, of course. And that is Belisarius' last battle. Strikes me, whilst not a MeG game, that could possibly make it quite a fun little scenario to play under some set of rules, but it's an odd epilogue to his career.
It'd certainly be the first time slingers are of any use in any war game.
I like slingers.
You don't see them in MeG, though.
I use them quite a lot. But you do take bowmen in preference because of the extra range.
Yeah.
Although, as Richard mentioned in, I think it was in our last podcast, wasn't it, that is potentially quite spurious and just a war games thing, and that Slinger's actually somewhat better than that. So I think Richard's tried to talk and he's on mute.
Sorry, yes. Indeed I did. Of course, sling ranges depend to some extent on the quality of the ammunition. Good river pebbles or ideally lead shot is what you want.
Yeah. Great. Okay, aware of that. I took significantly longer than I'd hoped on that section, but that's, as I said, Richard's better at doing these things succinctly than I am. But I hope along the way we've thrown up some ideas and thoughts for people about recreating some of these battles or similar battles, and some of the odd things that. I think it does reinforce that, you know, we create rules and lists to sort of average results, if you like, and that's what you try and come up with some average result and average things happening as your median line, then add dice to apply friction and variability on it. But you know, I think it shows us how different these battles are. You know, the old thing of every battle is unique. There isn't such a thing as a normal battle. You know, and what would you do to come up with a set of war games rules if you had just these 4 battles to go on? I think it'd be incredibly difficult. So there we go. I think we should move on to army lists now. I've been talking plenty too long now. So I am going to hand over to Matt, who has come up with an early Byzantine army. Now, we haven't asked him to come up with one of Belisarius's armies. This is just a list from the early Byzantine list in the Byzantine PDF. All I'm going to say at this point is it's a Matt army, and I am going to let him now describe it, and I will shut up. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you very much. Well, before I describe the army, I have to say 2024 is going to be my year of infantry. I've decided I just don't use infantry enough, and to improve my play, I'm using infantry armies. There will be some cavalry, but I'm using infantry armies this year. So with that in mind, early Byzantine, 552 is the date I chose. I don't think there was any particular, possibly the Allied date. I've gone with early Byzantine with a Sabia ally. I assume it's Sabia. Correct me if I'm wrong, somebody. For those that aren't aware, the list is standard coastal and mountains for its terrain. It's professional generals. So I've gone with 2 competent professional generals. One of those is the army commander, and a mediocre professional generals, which gives you 8 main army command cards, and then a talented, instinctive Savior allied general. Hopefully the reasoning behind that will become clear. It ends up with a PBS of 7 and a scouting of 3, so quite low for Byzantines, I guess, because they normally have more cavalry. Kind of giving away the plot before I get to it, but there we go. So the first is the Bucalore, is it? Sorry, I wasn't.
Biscuit eaters in my terms.
Yeah, right. The bodyguard types. Anyway, cavalry, drilled loose, superior, protected, experienced bow, short spear. 4 of those. They are, I believe, the minimum compulsory that you have to take. There are then 2 units of Byzantine cavalry, which are cavalry, drilled loose, average, protected. I've downgraded them to unskilled bow and short spear. 2 blocks of 4 of those, because again, the minimum you have to take is 8. Then there are 4 tugs of Scutatoi, who are infantry, drilled close, average, protected, experienced dart, short spear, shield wall, shield cover, all in 8s. So you've got a mere 32 of those. You then have the compulsory Sabia horse archers, which are cavalry formed flexible. I've downgraded them to poor. They're also unprotected. I've also made them unskilled bow, and you have to have 6 of those. So there you go. And then 3 blocks of Sabia foot, which are infantry, tribal loose, average protected, devastating charger, melee expert. 2 blocks of 9, 1 block of 8. So that's 11 tugs for a break of 6. There is also a single unit of skirmishers, which are Huns in inverted commas, which are cavalry skirmisher, average, unprotected, experienced bow, Cantabrian.
Yay!
Combat shy, 6 of those. Unusually for me, I have not downgraded them at all. In fact, I've actually made them an effective unit. Usually I'd turn them into poor unskilled and leave them in the camp, but there you go. Basically, the reason it is a large foot force is I really struggle to get a decent early Byzantine cavalry army. I just cannot get the list to work for me. And I don't dislike the look of this. I've heard that infantry fighting in woods can be quite good, so, you know, rather than my cavalry. So I thought I'd give it a whirl. So 3 blocks of Sabia.
You don't sound convinced about the idea that infantry are better than cavalry in woods, Matt.
Well, I will say that over the weekend at Ice and Fire, somebody used a Sabia foot ally against me in the open and battered me silly with it, quite frankly. So I'll give it a whirl. If I have to, I'll fight in the wood. But so yeah, how do I see the army working? It's an infantry army. I would probably float the army commander. You use one of probably the mediocre for the cavalry, the competent with the infantry, and throw your cards either way that you need them and push. The only thing I really don't like about the army is the utter lack of melee expert, because once it's committed, we shall see. Sabia foot is kind of what I'm looking at as a flank, basically a flank attack through difficult terrain or whatever. Use the infantry beside that, 1 unit of cavalry to skirmish out on the edge and try and push for. I don't think it's got enough grunt to get through quickly though, so yeah, it'd be interesting to try. And I've never used experienced darts as well, so that's another one to try.
Richard.
Yeah, I'm not a fan. I don't like I think the force of cavalry will have to hide behind the Scutari toy.
Yep.
The Sabbath foot, interestingly, I fought Mr. Hamilton with his Sabir ally, and beat them with some Indian archers and a unit of 3 elephants. Admittedly, the elephants died, but Sammy was very upset that I broke one of his Sabir foot. He still won the battle, so he's got nothing to complain about.
But he was so unlucky.
It's I'm not a fan. I'm sorry.
It's fine.
Yeah. Well, you know I'm not going to like the unskilled bow on the Byzantine Cavallari.
Well,
yeah, I think you just tipped. From my view, I can see where you're coming from. I think you just tipped a bit too much on the infantry. I think you do need a bit more cavalry with this one. I do like the idea of a good chunk of the Scutari though. They're incredibly good stodge, shield wall and shield cover. You know, they're just really resistant. You know, if you're looking for games in period as well, for instance, or in a roughly period theme. Yeah, experienced darts can be interesting. I fought an army with darts at the weekend. Happened to be Aztec, which was quite exciting because I had a mainly unprotected horse archer army. And they could have caused me absolute mayhem, but I managed to avoid that by not standing in too much in front of them a lot of the time. It's definitely not. I sort of see where you're coming from, but I do agree with Richard. You want no Bucalari definitely in a 6.
Well, I mean, the more sensible version would be drop the ally entirely and go with a 9 tug command, because that gets you the Vandal internal cavalry, so you get some dev charges
Oh,
in,
right. Yeah.
and you can take the bodyguard up to 6.
Yeah.
Probably put experienced bow back on the 2 4s, so it makes it much more.
If you've got say another couple of units of proper fighting cavalry, I'm not that worried personally. Not that worried about the 4s. I know this is something that it's just a personal preference choice Richard and I disagree on, because you can use them to support other stuff, or even sit in a 2 base with gap between 2 Scutator units. If anything charges them, you might be able to do something in that.
Which would be the reason I want them back up to experienced bow, because that'd be exactly how I'd use them. So
yeah. Or even projected forward and they skirmish back through the gap, So.
Yeah. Plus, you've got the Hunnic cavalry to give you a couple of skilled green dice in another gap somewhere along the line. So,
not arguing with the hunt. So
it's
there's a sort of, it's almost one. It's got to be worth banging it on the table for one game to see what it's actually like.
Yeah.
But one game.
one game. Yes.
I prefer the sound of what you're saying around, if you like, your more sensible version. But it's nice to look at these off the wall versions, because sometimes you go, actually, with a bit of tweaking, it's going to be good.
Yeah, I'd almost certainly try that version and then go back to the better version.
I wouldn't recommend taking it to a 2-day competition, that's for sure. Because
I'm not even going to bite on that. I'm not doing that. No.
No, you'd probably be trying to sell it after the second game, definitely. It'd be even quicker onto eBay than some of Robin's armies.
You're not wrong.
So after a bit of we're not that impressed, I suppose, is the thing. Let's move on to Richard, who I believe has something far more sensible.
Well, it's probably a bit dull, to be honest, but it's African Vandal, army number 3302, standard coastal mountains, poor unfortified camp, and I've gone for a talented army commander, competent and mediocre subs, and a late Moor ally with a competent instinctive general, because I like a bit of peril with my armies. That gives me 7 PBS cards and 6 scouting.
Whoa.
So no shortage of scouting cards in this one.
That's pretty impressive.
Basically, I have 8 units of Vandal cavalry. They're all 6s. One is superior protected short spear, depth charger, melee expert. The second one is superior but no melee expert. That's because only half of the superiors can be melee expert.
Okay, I was about to
then you've got 6 more average protected short spear, depth charger, melee expert cavalry. So fairly straightforward. The 9th tug is a unit of flexible Moorish cavalry, average unprotected experienced javelin, shoot and charge, because I had the extra 60 points and I didn't know what to do with them. So the army actually comes out at 9988 or something points, if I can find the 9998. So I don't think the shoot and charge is particularly beneficial, but I'd rather take it than waste 60 points. Along with the 9 cavalry tugs, you've got 3 sugs, 2 lots of Moorish best light horse, who are average unprotected skilled javelin, and 1 that is average unprotected experienced javelin. That's just the regular light horse.
Is that part of the ally, or?
They're all part of the ally, the light horse. 12 units in total. So if you're deploying thirds, that comes out a neat 4. 9 tugs, so 5 to break. Charge in, break off, charge in again. And if you can't break off, rely on your melee expert. Just hope you're not fighting something with a lot of elephants, I guess, or long spear, probably.
Yes.
Yes, and dismountable long spear, perhaps.
It's direct. Whether if is this one of Dr. Eliot's armies you've nicked? It's got all the hallmarks of a Simon Elliot army, except it's probably got more like horse than he would use.
Yeah, no, I'd like to claim that I could figure this one out on my own. I wouldn't suggest that it might not have been invented by somebody else, but hey, I'll claim it as being an original.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those lists that does exactly what it says on the tin, isn't it?
Yeah, it will. I can't imagine the battles will last too long. You might come second best to charging lancers, where you might want to deploy in woods or something to get better advantage, because those charging lancers don't work in woods, whereas your short spear can still do so.
Yeah.
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 Yes, it is what it is, really.
Yeah, I can't.
Entirely mobile.
Yeah.
Didn't even consider whether no camp was an option, to be honest, but probably it means dropping something almost certainly.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Matt, what do you think? Oh, perhaps, yeah.
Stunned him into silence.
Stunned him into silence.
On mute.
He's muted.
That'll be why. Yes.
It's all the extended silence. Yeah.
I was too busy staring at this thing of beauty that Richard's created. Well, you know, my predilection for massed cavalry. So, you know, yeah, short spear, death charge, melee expert. What's not to love? Yeah. Quite frankly, it's throw in some woods, and I'm happy as Larry.
It is. Yeah, I think you just go for it, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, you know, you'll have a bad day if somebody puts long spear and pike down, but other than that, I can't find any fault in it, really. It is what it is, quite frankly. I love the 7-6 scouting. That's just great.
The 6 scouting is fantastic. You know, getting 6 it can be quite difficult. You know, but obviously with the 3, you got 9 loose.
I think you've got 54 cavalry and 18 light horse.
Yeah, and then 6 of the cavalry are flexible, so they count as light horse for skirmishing.
So in effect, 48 and 24. Yeah.
Yeah, so that is pretty good. Yeah. Not the sort of army I would want to use. But equally, I'm not with a lot of the armies I use. I'm not sure I'd want to face it either. I think I did a few years ago. Keith Spedding used something quite similar, and I had I think it's my Western hand, all mounted Western hand, and basically my shooting was well above average. And if it hadn't have been, I'd have just been flattened up against the back edge of the board, basically. So yeah, no, I think that's obviously getting the thumbs up. Let us go with my offering then. I rather predictably, I think, went for an Sasanid Persian. Let's kick off the year with some men on horses with bows. Now, but I have chosen to utilise a new feature in the 2024 lists in this one. Anyway, this is Sasanid Persian. Again, it's from the Byzantine book, list number 3305. The terrain is stand-up plains and mountains. I've got a poor unfortified camp, and I've included some Armenian subject allies. My command structure is a talented instinctive army commander, competent instinctive and mediocre instinctive subby, and the ally commander is competent instinctive. With the troops in the army, I get a PBS of 7 and a scouting of 5. Richard beats me. Oh, damn his eyes, damn his eyes.
Well, you chose some infantry. That's your fault.
I do actually have some infantry in this one. Yes, indeed. So, okay. What I have gone for two 6s of best Asvaran. who are cavalry formed loose, superior protected, experienced bow, short spear, shower shooting. Then 3 units of the normal Asvaran, who are the same but average. So experienced bow, short spear, shower shooting. The shower shooting is what's been added in the 2024 lists as an option. We've had it before for the middle Sasanid, but they also changed to being armoured horse fully armoured. The Sassanids have basically dropped that sort of stuff by the later period, became far more influenced by Turks and steppe nomads. And a big difference between the two is that whilst the armoured horse fully armoured ones can't skirmish or evade or run away, these ones, whilst they can't skirmish, do have the option to run away if they want to. And the shower shooting remains the same. Richard mentioned I've got some infantry. I've got 2 units of archers, 1 formed loose, average protected, experienced bow, 6 of them, and 1 formed loose, average unprotected, experienced bow, combat shy, against 6. The last 2 tugs are Armenian allies, a guard cavalry, 6 bases of formed loose, superior protected, charging lancer, and 6 of average protected, charging lancer, melee expert. Got 3 sugs, 2 Sassanid horse archers, skirmishers, average unprotected, experienced bow, Cantabrian. Actually, one of them is Cantabrian combat shy. They aren't both combat shy because I had a few points left. And there's a compulsory Armenian horse archer as well, who's also average, unprotected, experienced bow, combat shy. They're all 6s. So there you are. It's relatively mobile. It's not as dancy as some horse archer armies because it can't skirmish, but I say it can run away if it needs to. And the shower shooting can at times be very interesting. For those who don't know, if you've got shower shooting, when you're shooting any S's, in the same way as artillery, add 1 extra slow to your normal slows you might inflict. And if you're shooting in the charge phase and get contacted, the opponents don't get the plus for you having shot. So there we are. I think it's a fairly standardish, certainly standard nick Sasanid Persian. Over to you guys for your thoughts.
Yeah, I'd quite like to try out the shower shooting with the formed loose cavalry.
Yeah.
I've never tried it. I faced the close types.
Yeah, I have.
Middle Sassanid Persian at the weekend, and they shot away my elephants very effectively.
I suffered that as well. In fact, one unit killed. I got a unit of 3 elephants charged a unit of 6 of those. They broke my elephants, and I felt very lucky that I'd killed 2 bases of them in the fighting.
I never got to fight. I got shot away before reaching them.
My other elephant unit suffered that one.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I think I'd still favour my African Vandal over this if they met face to face.
Yeah.
But it'd be an interesting battle to fight.
It would, yeah. I think, yeah. If you were to be hard nosed about it, if I was designing it to take on the African Vandal, 1, I'd have some elephants in it, and I wouldn't go with the shower shooting so that I could skirmish as well as run away.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Matt. This wouldn't want to go in the woods because it gets in the way of the shooting.
That just makes it more interesting. You've got to think positive.
Shooting on black dice.
Yes. Yeah. So it's the only kind of shooting you need. The number of times it goes against. Anyway, yeah. I mean, I have to say, I really need to try out shower shooting. Say that fast. Go on, I dare you. Because I've neither fought against it nor used it, and yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I like the army. It's something I quite enjoy using, I suspect.
Yeah, the other thing about the formed loose Asfaran with shower shooting is they move at 5, unlike 4 in the Middle Sassanid, so it's a more mobile version as well.
And I do like the fact that they can run away, which the close order stuff can't do, because that's always my concern with those close order shower shooting is if you get it wrong, you're going to get absolutely belted. Whereas at least, you know, if you do make a mistake, you've got a fighting chance of getting out of dodge.
Yeah, especially if you've made a mistake in front of infantry, you can just run away.
Yeah,
and if you roll a 1, you still go 3, which is, unless the fleet of foot, the infantry will not catch you, unless you've really cocked up and the angles are wrong.
Yeah.
So no, I think it's. I am very tempted to try it at some point as well, because just of the difference. I have tried the shower shooting ones, the close formation ones. I quite like using them, but you do miss a bit of this has more options. Although there's a slight odd thing in the Asfaran in this army are better in the charge phase than the Middle Sassanid ones, because they've got the short spear, but they're worse in the ongoing melee because they're not fully armoured. So that's another difference between the two, and finding how that works.
Not tempted to try and get the Daylami Guard into the list?
1, no, and 2, I think I did suggest we should keep the dates of these within Belisarius's lifetime, and they're only available after his death.
Okay.
Yeah, but basically, no, I'm not interested in them. Not in this style of army. It could be a different style of Sasanid Persian where, yes, they would be, because they're impact weapon, aren't they? Yeah, they're sort of regularized Daylami. They're superior impact weapon. They're quite cute. So yeah. No, honestly, this one I fancy trying. Apart from the fact I currently don't have a Sasanid army, because I sold my old one because I wanted to redo it. I wanted to redo the paint job and thought I'm not going to strip it all down and do it. So I sold it and I bought another one.
I was going to say, wait a couple of weeks, you'll have completed them.
No.
There'll be pictures on Facebook before you know it.
The main problem is the one I've bought is definitely a 4th century one, because all the cavalry have got barded or armoured horses, where they don't have them in this army. And
You'll have to buy a second Sasanid.
I'd want to buy another one. Basically, the same army, just different figures. And I'm not sure. I've got such a big painting pile at the moment. I think that would be daft even for me.
So about 3 months' time then.
Yeah. I wouldn't put it past me in the second half of the year. It's especially as I have identified amongst the various Lurkio ranges figures that are quite close to a depiction of a 6th century Sassanid cavalryman.
Actually, as you mentioned that, can we just say that Richard, who's taken over Lurkio, has done a bang-up job, at least in the WhatsApp group, of publicising a lot of figures that I didn't even know existed.
No, absolutely. I think over the past few years,
for the benefit of any listeners, this is not me that they're referring to.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
It's another Richard Belisarius. Apologies to Richard if I've mangled his surname there, who has taken on the distribution license for Lurkio miniatures, and is getting it all back up and running. And he's after some trials and tribulations, partly involving HMRC and customs duties and things like that, he's hoping, I believe, to have the website shop up and running this weekend or by the end of January. Yeah, and it does appear there was quite a lot of Lurkio figures that quite a lot of people haven't seen before.
And I seem to recall somebody here went away with a particularly big bag full of lead from the last competition from Richard.
Yes, but to help Richard out, honest, after sell, because those are my replacement Sassanids. I sold my original Lurkio army to buy a new one. Rich, because I wanted it, Richard took the opportunity to test out some of his molds and test out his casting process to get his hand in. So I luckily got, obviously, obviously it's not freebie. I had to pay him, but I got it earlier than other customers will do. So maybe feel good. Slightly smug, but somebody will pinch an arm before I will. So yeah, and a big shout out to Richard. He's doing a lot of work on that, and wish him the best of luck with that, because I like quite a lot of the Lurkio ranges.
I'm liking more and more now I can see them.
Well, it does help, doesn't it?
Know what you're buying. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So okay, so realise we've been going a bit now, so probably ought to be winding up. Otherwise, our listeners will be falling asleep. I just wanted to mention one thing, because I promised somebody this. I promised Simon Stokes that in the next podcast I would mention that on the 23rd and 24th of March at Battlefield Hobbies, Simon and his friends are running a Pacto campaign weekend, which isn't a regular competition type thing. It is running, they're looking to have 4 to 6 players running a campaign over the weekend. They will provide 3,000 point Pacto armies for players to use, although you can bring your own if you've got the right figures. They've got 3 possible campaigns, or they could run multiple campaigns if they get enough people, 4 to 6 players per campaign, a classical Greek one, a Rise of Rome one, and an early Italian Wars Condottieri. So if people would like to do something a bit different from our usual competition weekends, run through a whole campaign over a couple of days, there's your chance. Do something a bit different. You don't need figures, you just need to turn up with enthusiasm.
And I believe you can turn up for just one day as well.
Oh, that could be good, because I'm not sure I can do the 2 days, but one day I'm sure I could.
So that is my intention, as I believe one of the days clashes with the Society of Ancients Battle Day.
It does, and one of the reasons, it was partly because I think I haven't been to one of those for ages, and I really ought to go back to one at some point. So I might be doing the same as you, Richard. No, thanks for mentioning that, because I hadn't picked that up. So yeah, really, I would encourage that, because it's going to be something different. It's a give it a go. And I think obviously Pacto should work really well within the campaign, across the weekend running campaigns, because the battles can be resolved fairly quickly. So you actually get campaign games. I've no idea what the mechanisms for their campaigns are going to be, but I'm sure it'll be fun, because they run them regularly at their clubs. So there we go. Richard's also obviously just mentioned the SOA Battle Day. So I don't know if you want to expand on that, Richard.
It's this year. It will be a refights of the Battle of Ilipa, 206, I believe, in Spain, Carthaginians and Romans. It will be held at a new venue. This will be Thatcham Village Hall, which is about 3 or 4 miles outside of Newbury, between Newbury and sort of Reading direction along the A4. All welcome, £10 entry for the day. And there'll be lots of other rule sets playing the same battle at the same time.
Is one of them a MEG game? Are you running that?
At this stage, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay. But yeah, I remember it's a long time since I've been to one. It was great fun, and it's interesting just to see how different rule sets take different takes on games. And is it still the people are always welcoming for people to join in games?
Yeah, you don't have to be arranging a game. You can just turn up on the day and participate in the games that take your fancy.
Great stuff. Okay, Matt, anything to finish with? Anything you'd like to say?
Other than Ice and Fire was absolutely stonking last weekend. My usual mediocre middle tables position, but yeah, no, it was really good as always.
I think we were all about round there, weren't we?
Yes, yeah, we were bunched in the middle quite nicely.
Yes, I took Gokturk which had elephants and horse archers, and it was a very interesting experience trying to coordinate elephants and horse archers, because they are not the most complementary troop types, and that was really, really interesting. Not sure I'd do it again. Thoroughly enjoyed the 4 games, but you can test theories just a little too far.
Mine was totally different, but for similar reasons. I ran Carinian Greek with dismountable hoplites. Sorry, which was a whole world of cheese, quite frankly. So, although I will keep the army and use it, I'm not going to be using the dismantable hoplite option because it's just so broken.
Okay, yeah. And of course, we should say thank you so much to the organisers for that. Ray, who organised it, GK did the draws and stuff, and very, very, very kindly gave up his Sunday games because unfortunately Ben Allen had to go home because of family illness, and we were left with odd numbers. And Graham Clacker, well, say took 1 for the team. He took 2 for the team. So big thanks to him as well. Okay, so unless with any last minute thoughts, I think thank you guys for your participation tonight, and hopefully you, the listeners, enjoyed this slightly different one. Apologies if I went on a bit too long, but hopefully in between there, Richard and Matt made some intelligent comments about possible battles, and we look forward to seeing you later on at the next one, or the next comp, or whatever. So goodbye, and keep rolling those skulls.